Hey there everybody, today we're painting a Hearthkyn Salvager, especially the jump out guy because he's the coolest one in the set. So let's get ready, let's get started. So some Rhinox hide here, just to get into the shadowed areas, the under part of the model, where there'll be the least light, because we want this undertone for when we put in some contrast paint in a couple of steps time. Just making sure to get into all those under areas, dropping the model plenty, gotta roll it around on the mat a little bit. But we're getting to the under parts of the arms, under parts of the arm, all the little crevices where we want the colour of the armour to be a little dark with a little bit more colour character, and that's why we're using this nice dark rich brown. Okay, we're going to be airbrushing the highlighted areas now, so going from the top onto the highest points of the model, we're going to go with aerial yellow. It's a little thin down, just to get it through the airbrush, but this is going to make the orange arm we're going to paint it really pop in the top areas and draw all the focus to where we want it. Then Magmadroth Flame, beautiful contrast paint from Citadel. All over, no need to be too tight with this because it's going to be everywhere. And we'll clean it up with the other paints that we're getting with. But we just want to be fairly even with this. We don't want it too watery, but we also don't want it too thick. We want to get it all over, try to avoid any pooling, so we're working quickly through each flat panelled area. There we see, taking it a section at a time if we can. Just making sure we get a nice even coat, beautiful lovely orange, and those undercolours, the yellow and the Rhinox hide, they're gonna come through just a little bit, just to give it a little bit of colour interest. Now we're going with a pretty heavy dry brush of Troll Slayer orange, and this is going to be the actual main colour of the armour. Really pops, really bright, vibrant orange colour. But we're just going to going over the top, so we're avoiding the lower, more recessed areas just a little bit, so that Rhinox hide comes through, but the yellow is really helping this orange to pop. Again, we're doing this early on because we don't want to have to worry too much about the other areas we're going to paint, so we don't have to be too careful here. But you do also want to make sure you're not overworking it and getting into the deeper parts of the model and losing that rich brown and those layers of colour interest that will really pay off in the later stages. Alright, once that dries, we're going to give it another slightly lighter dry brushing with Fire Dragon Bright. This is just to give the armour a little bit more volume, a bit more shape. So we're only looking here for the higher areas and the sharper points of the armour. We're not looking to coat it completely. I'm being quite light-handed in my brushing here. and then super light very quickly, just on the highest points and just on the sharpest edges. A very, very, very light dry brushing with Flash Gitz yellow. Now I'm using XV88. I do like this brown for leather, and we're just going to do all the straps and the pouches around the miniature. Also, not in the video, for some reason I didn't get the footage, is I've actually painted all of the rest of his armour that isn't orange in Black Legion contrast paint from Citadel. Just giving that a nice even coat, just tidies up all those bits and pieces from all the dry brushing. Yeah, so this lovely light XV88 is going to look really good when we come in later with a nice dark brown solvent wash. And that's really going to come to life with that. Okay, good old lead belcher now. We're going to be doing the knee pads, the arm pads, and all the metal parts of his weapon and jump pack. Anywhere that we feel like we want those metal bits and pieces, and the belt buckle too. Lead belcher is a fairly forgiving paint. We just need to be careful we don't get it anywhere that we don't want it, where we've worked really hard for that shape in the orange colour. So just being careful around the edges, close to where these metal parts are going to meet the armour. Getting into the mechanical bits of the gun, around the handle and the trigger. Now I'm using Ziegwald Burgundy, just a lovely rich red contrast paint, and I'm just using this for the handle of his axe. I don't want to draw too much attention to it, but I want it to have a little character of its own, so this will sit nicely into the recesses with that red and just give it some subtle highlights with that I don't need to work on too much. Alright, some titanium white ink because I want this super bright pop of what I imagine to be a little light on his chest. I'm also going to do the buttons and controls that are on his wrist and his gauntlets, and then we'll come back in with contrast paint to go over those, or just brighter colours, and this will just make it really pop from the armour that's already fairly bright. Just being super careful on these tiny details because I don't want the white to seep too much into the recesses around the buttons. And I'm also going to be painting his I think it's a plasma axe, but the blade of his axe and the little back pick area of it too, because I'm going to be using some lovely blue contrast paint on that a little later. The reason we're using ink here instead of something like Corax white is we just want that extra level of intensity in the bright white. And then we're going over those buttons with the ball red, nice and bright, but not drawing too much attention away from the centre of the model, just giving them their own little bit of character. Frostheart blue for the blade. Make sure we put a lovely coat on because I want it to sit and have a little pool just on each side to give that plasma axe a little bit of life of its own. Okay, I did actually do that little light with aerial yellow. Again, not sure why that footage isn't there, but here we go anyway. We're going to wash basically the entire model. We're going to do the orange armor and the leather pouches in a solvent wash using mineral oil, solvent-free, odorless mineral oil with a mixture of lamp black and burnt sienna oil paints from Winsor & Newton. The oil paints were in equal measure, so it's 1:1, and then there was a fairly thin mineral oil wash because I wanted a lot of control over this. I wanted to take quite a while to dry, so I could really work into the recesses. And we can also take advantage of that great capillary reaction from the solvent in these areas like this on the armor. So we get a lovely deep colour in those recesses without being too washed out, without getting too heavy on the rest of the armour. We can get into all these little nooks and crannies as well, give the armour a little bit of life. I always imagine a little bit of dirt in there as well, you know. Dwarves from underground, space dwarves. Now Retributor armour, there's not too many areas of this, but just some of the small details, these tiny little lines on the axe, and then also the under part of the head of the axe, and then just some small details on the jump pack itself. Just being really careful here to make sure they don't spill over, because we don't want to be fixing too much. We can always come back with some contrast black paint, but we want to be careful with it. We don't want to be working more than we have to and doing too many touch-ups. Again, very carefully on these super fine details on the axe. The Retributor armor, the bright pop that gold's going to really, even though it's a small detail, it'll really stand out from the black of the axe. And then we're going in heavy as always with the Nuln Oil. Everything that's metal is getting a lovely coat of Nuln Oil. Not letting it pull too much, but we're just working into those recesses so we get a heavier build up in those deeper lines and giving that metal that lovely bit of worn and worked and used feel. Getting into the knee pads, also the elbow pads, just makes them look a bit more worked, used, a bit more battle zone. And the vents on the top do actually, what I do is I use the Nuln Oil to fill those recesses, and then that makes those vents look a bit deeper. You probably noticed he was missing his head. I wanted to paint the head separately because I wanted to make sure I gave it a all-round work detail. So Kislev flesh for the flesh area itself, Garagak sewer for the leather cap. I don't want to work too hard on this detail. I want to really draw attention, but I don't want to be working too many small details. I want the shape of the model to speak for itself on this. So Garagak sewer, a good coat of this will give that leather all the character it needs, and then Black Legion contrast paint just around the bottom where the collar is, and we painted the inside of where the head will go with that as well when we did the rest of his suit in the contrast paint. And now when I glue the head into the recess, they'll match together nicely. Very, very carefully we're going with lead belcher for the edges. Bump the head on my camera again there, as you can see. But we're going into the edges of this little visor. Be super careful not to get into the leather of the cap, because fixing that's going to be quite difficult, because we want that Garagak sewer to do all the work. Almost done. It's a little painstaking because I really want to be careful I don't get onto the face or the leather of the helmet at all. Tiny, tiny strokes. The brush isn't too heavy with paint, so I don't risk any heavy strokes or spilling into the area, especially this white area of the visor, which I really want to be bright, and if I get any lead belcher in there, cleaning it up is going to be very difficult. Now into the visor itself, some pretty watered down warpstone glue. It's about 1:1 water and paint, and then it just sits into the recess of that visor. Then the center will be a little brighter naturally as the liquid just sits in there. A touch of titanium white, very delicately with a very small brush, just to catch his teeth. And I'm also putting a little dot where each of his eyes would be in that visor. Now I'm using some Tamiya liquid cement, the extra thin, to glue the head in, putting some into the head hole, so to speak, and then onto the neck. And the reason I'm using this is I prefer to work with the liquid cement when I'm gluing in heads towards the end. It gives me a little bit of time to move things around, and you also get a cleaner bond rather than with some super glues you get that dry, crusty flakiness. We want to avoid that. So tweezers, drop the head in, make sure he's looking the right way, and then just leave it to dry and set. Okay, a pretty thick mineral wash. So a solvent wash here, mineral oil and titanium white, and the reason I've kept it quite thick is I want a bit of control over where it goes. I don't want it to flow quite as easily as the last wash that we did, because I want to be able to work this around a little bit, and it'll take a little time to dry, so I'll be able to come back in later and clean off anything that I don't want to be there. But this nice bright white sitting in the recess here at the edge of the axe really helps sell that plasma effect. Both parts of the blade and the edge of the blade here as well. Nice and bright, and I'll come back in a second with a cotton bud and just clear off where it's got a little too excessive for me. on the side of the blade there. So I'm just looking at the edge being nice and bright and white. Now I'm using some Necron compounds, lovely dry paint from Citadel. Getting into the blacker areas of the weaponry and just a little touch on the armor. Just gives it a little weird feel, but without getting... I've done this with Lead Belcher before, and it always ends up being too heavy. With the Necron compound, I feel like it's a very subtle scuffing feel that it gives to these armoured areas. You can be quite rough as long as the brush isn't too heavy with paint, and you shouldn't be too heavy when you're dry brushing anyway. So we're using Wraithbone here to draw the stripes into his shoulder pauldrons, and we'll be adding some transfers to these a little later. So I want to be careful. I do want fairly straight lines, but they don't need to be perfect, because once the transfers are applied, I'll be going back in to give it a little weathering, but also using the Wraithbone to take away some of the shine of the transfer itself. So hope for steady hands here, deep breaths, painting straight. The model does have some lines that guide you where these are going to be, but you still want to be careful, because when you go over, especially with the contrast between this orange and white, it's quite stark, so you'll really see any imperfections. Again, it doesn't need to be 100% perfect, but we definitely want it to look like straight lines. And bumpy head on the camera again. Because it's super thin, we're going to have to give this a couple of thin coats. Just being careful to stay inside the area we've already painted. Then, using a little plastic spatula that I have, I'm going to apply some Astro Grime to the base, and then I do use a brush to just sort of work it into some of those creases. And I'm going to paint the rock that he stood on itself, because I want to paint that separately with a matching grey. But using the brush here, just working that Astro Granite into the edges and up to the edge. I don't want to go over the edge of the base, because then once I paint the edge it'll still be lumpy, so we're going to be fairly careful not to get this all over the place. Now here I'm giving the black areas of his armour, or his suit, a dry brushing with Dark Reaper. And the reason I do this is because I don't want to spend too much time on those parts of his armour, because I don't want too much attention to them. But this dry brush and Dark Reaper really just sort of helps it, gives it a little bit of depth and takes away some of the shine from that contrast paint. And then in the Mechanicus Standard Grey, I'm going over that rock because it matches the Astro Granite fairly closely. Now while all that dries, I'm applying the transfers. I will probably be making a video on how I do this. Transfers are fantastic, but they can be fiddly. But once you've got the knack for it, they can add so much to your models. While those dry, I'm giving the whole base and that rock a good heavy wash of Agrax Earthshade. So with that bluish grey from the Astro Granite and the Mechanicus Standard Grey, this browner wash is going to help add depth a bit more. Using a tiny sponge and some Wraithbone, I'm just adding some weathering to the shoulders where the transfers were applied. This will help take off some of the shine from the transfer sheet, but also just add a little bit of character to those shoulder pauldrons. Quick brushing with matte varnish from Vallejo here. This will take off the last of the shine from the transfers and help them stay nice and safe on there. Now dry brushing on the base and the stone with Mechanicus Standard Grey just to bring back some of that mid-tone that we may have lost with the Agrax Earthshade wash. Also takes away some of the shine, so we're not drawing too much attention to the base, but it still looks nice. And then a light dry brushing very carefully with an Administratum Grey, just to pick up some of the higher areas, especially on the stone, and a little bit on the base just to give it some areas of character. Again, we're not drawing too much attention to it, we just don't want it to look flat. Painting the edge of the base here in Black Legion contrast paint. Nice and shiny, nice and clean, all the way around the edges. Make sure not to spill over onto the top, so you want to be fairly steady with this, using the tip of the brush as a guide. There we go. Once all that's dry, giving the base the signature with the silver pen, so everyone knows where it came from. And there we go, there he is in all of his glory. Absolutely beautiful, love painting these models. Give us a like, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.